The plastic permit box, which my contractor had dutifully screwed to the temporary siteboard that morning, was empty. Not just empty, but open. The little hinged door flapped in the slight afternoon breeze. A mocking, silent tongue stuck out at me. I felt a familiar stillness descend, the kind of quiet that precedes a complex engineering problem, or, in my former life, the initiation of a carefully planned operation. My eyes did a slow, methodical sweep of the area. The ground was soft from a recent rain, and there they were, footprints, small, narrow, with a tread pattern that screamed expensive walking shoes rather than work boots. They led from the edge of my property line, straight to the siteboard, and then retreated back toward the manicured lawns of the Pleasant Meadows subdivision. I followed the tracks with my eyes, my gaze coming to rest on a figure standing imperiously on her own perfect lawn, just across the invisible line that separated my wooded acreage from her kingdom of beige. It was Brenda, of course, President Brenda, as she insisted on being called. She was holding a sheaf of papers in one hand, my freshly printed, city-stamped, and very expensive building permits. She wasn't even trying to hide them. She held them like a captured battle standard. I took a slow breath, letting the cool forest air fill my lungs. Anger is a poor lubricant for the machinery of conflict. I preferred the cold, high-viscosity oil of methodical purpose. I walked to the edge of my property, stopping precisely 1 inch from the line. I did not cross it. "Brenda," I said. My voice was calm, even, the way you'd speak to a skittish animal you didn't want to startle into doing something stupid. Or, in this case, something more stupid. She turned, a practiced look of surprised innocence on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes were small, hard, and glittered with the triumphant zeal of a petty tyrant who believes she has just won a significant victory. She was a woman who seemed perpetually clenched, from her tightly sprayed helmet of blonde hair to her thin, disapproving lips. Today she was a festival of beige and simmering rage, her knit top the color of weak tea, her slacks the shade of a dusty road. "Colonel Miller," she said, her voice dripping with a kind of saccharine condescension that sets teeth on edge. She made my rank sound like an accusation. "Enjoying the afternoon?" "I was," I replied, my gaze fixed on the papers in her hand. "Brenda, you have my construction permits." It was not a question, it was a statement of fact, a tactical positioning of the pieces on the board. Her face hardened, the faux pleasantry melting away to reveal the granite certainty beneath. "I have removed these," she corrected, giving the papers a little shake. "This project of yours has not been approved by the Architectural Review Committee." Here we go. I am by nature and by training a patient man. I spent 30 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. I've planned and overseen the construction of airfields in deserts, bridges over hostile rivers, and fortifications in places you've only seen on the news. I understand rules, regulations, and chains of command. I also understand jurisdiction. "Brenda," I began again, keeping my tone level. "We've been over this. My property is not, nor has it ever been, part of the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association. Your committee has no more authority here than the local garden club has over the moon." I gestured to the thick woods behind me. My deed, the county plat map, and the HOA's own charter documents, which I took the liberty of reviewing before I purchased, all confirm this. Your authority ends right at the edge of your lawn. I pointed down at the invisible line between us. Right there. She took a half step back, as if the very air on my side of the line was contaminated with defiance. A faint, unpleasant blush crept up her neck. It was the color of spoiled ham. "That is a legalistic technicality," she hissed, her voice rising in pitch. "Your structure," she said the word like it was a foul taste in her mouth, "is visible from the walking path. It affects the aesthetic harmony of the community. The bylaws are clear. All structures must be approved. They are clear, I agreed. They are also clearly applicable only to the properties listed in the HOA's founding declarations. This isn't one of them. Therefore, the bylaws are irrelevant. The permits in your hand, however, are issued by the county. They are legal, official documents, and you have removed them from a designated construction site. That, I paused, letting the word hang in the air, is not a legalistic technicality. It's a crime. A flicker of something, uncertainty perhaps, danced in her eyes, but was quickly extinguished by a fresh wave of self-righteous fury. She was a woman who ran on the high-octane fuel of her own indignation. "Don't you dare threaten me, you builder," she spat. "I am the president of this HOA. I have a duty to protect the property values of our residents. I will have your little project shut down. I will fine you into oblivion. I will put a lien on this entire property so you can never sell it. You will regret the day you decided to defy me." She brandished my permits one last time, then turned with a sharp, bird-like motion and marched back toward her oversized, beige house. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of her retreating footsteps on the flagstone path. I looked at the empty permit box. I looked at the neat stacks of lumber and the precisely laid foundation for my future workshop, my sanctuary, the place I was building for my retirement, for peace, for the quiet joy of making things with my own two hands. And in that moment, the switch flipped. This is no longer a simple dispute with a difficult neighbor. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a declaration of war. A low-grade, suburban, beige-on-beige war, but a war nonetheless. And I do not lose wars. A familiar calm, a sense of quiet purpose that I hadn't felt since my retirement ceremony, settled over me. The objective was clear. The threat had been identified. The mission was afoot. Brenda had just walked into a kill box of her own design. She just didn't know it yet. Operation Overstep was a go. Hey everyone, now before we get into the nuts and bolts of how I dismantled a petty tyrant with nothing more than a 3-ring binder and the United States Postal Service, let me just say this. If you have ever had a run-in with a power-tripping HOA board member, if you've ever gotten a nasty letter about the height of your grass or the shade of your trim, then you know the kind of slow-burning frustration I'm talking about. It's a special kind of madness. So, if this story sounds like it's going to be your kind of catharsis, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what your own HOA nightmare story is. Misery loves company, and believe me, I've got a story that will make yours feel a little less lonely. Now, let me tell you how this all started. It didn't begin with stolen permits or threats of financial ruin. It began with a search for peace. For 30 years, I was Colonel John Miller of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. My life was a symphony of logistics, stress calculations, and immovable deadlines. I built things in places where people were actively trying to unbuild them. I lived out of dusty tents and sterile forward operating bases. I ate more meals ready to eat than any human should. My world was loud, chaotic, and relentlessly demanding. And I was good at it. Very good. But when my 30 years were up, I was done. All I wanted was the antithesis of my career. I wanted quiet. I wanted solitude. I wanted to hear birds instead of generators, and the rustle of leaves instead of the rumble of heavy machinery. So I sold my house near the base, cashed in my pension, and started looking for a sanctuary. I spent the better part of a year searching. I had a checklist, as you might expect. At least 5 acres, heavily wooded, a source of live water if possible, and most importantly, absolutely, unequivocally, no homeowners association. I had commanded battalions. I had no desire to be commanded on the acceptable color of my mailbox. After months of looking at sterile suburban plots and overpriced farmettes, I found it. Tucked away at the end of a county road was a 10-acre parcel of land that was perfect. It was a beautiful piece of raw, undeveloped North Carolina woodland, thick with old-growth oak and hickory. A small, clear creek, fed by a natural spring, cut across one corner of the property. It was teeming with life: deer, turkey, the occasional fox. It was the quiet I had been dreaming of. The property had one quirk. It was shaped like a fat letter L, and the shorter leg of the L bordered the back of a pristine, upscale housing development called Pleasant Meadows. During the property inspection, my lawyer and I spent an entire day going over the deeds, surveys, and county records with a fine-tooth comb. The history was clear. My 10 acres were the remnant of an old family farm that had sold off the larger portion of its land to the developers of Pleasant Meadows decades ago. The farmer, a cantankerous old fellow by all accounts, had refused to sell this last parcel. It was grandfathered in, a little island of wilderness abutting a sea of identical houses with identical landscaping. It was not, and had never been, subject to the Pleasant Meadows HOA covenants and restrictions. The paperwork was ironclad. I bought it the next day. I spent the first year just walking the land, getting to know its rhythms. I cleared a small area, well away from the creek and the property lines, and had a modest, comfortable house built. The back of my house faced the deep woods, not the subdivision. My nearest neighbor in Pleasant Meadows was a good 200 yards away, separated by a thick belt of trees that I had no intention of ever touching. My grand retirement project was to build a workshop, not a shed, but a real, honest-to-God workshop. About 800 square feet, soundproofed, with a proper dust collection system, 220-volt outlets, the works. It was where I planned to spend my days, lost in the scent of sawdust, building furniture, turning bowls, and generally making things that had no strategic or military value whatsoever. Being who I am, I planned the project like a military operation. I hired a surveyor to remark my property lines, just to be certain. I hired an architect to draw up the plans. I submitted those plans to the county planning and zoning department. I navigated the bureaucracy, filled out the endless forms, and secured every single required permit: building, electrical, plumbing, for a small sink. It was a thick stack of official documents, each one a testament to due process. Construction began on a Monday. The footings were dug, the foundation was poured. The contractor, a good old boy named Earl, who had been building things in this county for 40 years, put up a temporary site board near the access path to my property, and in the clear plastic box, he posted the permits for all the world and any inquisitive county inspector to see. The first sign of trouble came on Tuesday. I was out back, supervising the delivery of lumber, when I saw her. Brenda. She was marching across her backyard, her face a mask of stern disapproval. She stopped at the edge of my property, her arms crossed, and just stared at the worksite. I gave her a friendly wave. She did not wave back. She just stood there for a solid 10 minutes, radiating hostility, before turning and marching back inside. I didn't think much of it. Some people are just curious. Some are just grumpy. I had dealt with far worse than a grumpy neighbor. But then came the first letter. And that's when I knew this wasn't just grumpiness. This was a campaign. It arrived on Thursday, not in a standard envelope, but in a thick, cream-colored one. The kind of paper that feels important, or at least wants you to think it is. In the top left corner, embossed in a flowing gold script, were the words, Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association, Office of the President. I remember thinking it was an absurdly grandiose letterhead for a neighborhood watch on steroids. The letter itself was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive prose. It was written in a florid, pseudo-legal language that was clearly meant to intimidate. It formally notified me that an unapproved auxiliary structure was being erected in clear violation of Covenant 7.14 of the Pleasant Meadows Architectural Standards. It informed me that all construction must cease immediately, pending a formal review by the Architectural Review Committee, for which I was instructed to submit a full set of plans, a materials list, and a non-refundable application fee of $250. It concluded with a thinly veiled threat: failure to comply will result in daily fines, as outlined in the association's charter. I read it twice. Then I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. She was trying to enforce her petty rules on land she didn't control, based on a charter that didn't apply. It was like a captain of a fishing boat trying to give orders to a nuclear submarine. My amusement, however, quickly cooled into something else. This was an attempt at intimidation, an assertion of authority where none existed. And if my time in the court taught me anything, it's that you don't cede ground to a bully. You don't let a false assertion of authority go unchallenged. You meet it, you dismantle it, and you establish a firm and unambiguous perimeter. So the fun was over. It was time to get to work. I went to my office, pulled out a brand new 3-inch D-ring binder, a heavy-duty one. On the spine, I affixed a neatly printed label: Operation Overstep. I 3-hole punched Brenda's ridiculous letter and placed it in the first plastic sleeve. It looked lonely in there. I knew it wouldn't be for long. This was the beginning of the binder. The binder would become my weapon, my shield, and my gospel. Every piece of correspondence, every photograph, every invoice, every scrap of research would go into the binder. It would be a complete, unassailable record of the coming conflict. Brenda thought she was fighting a retired hobbyist. She had no idea she was fighting a man who had spent 3 decades mastering the art of documentation and strategic planning. My first official act in Operation Overstep was to draft a reply. I didn't write an angry email or make a furious phone call. I composed a formal letter, printed on clean, professional, 24-pound bond paper. I kept my tone polite, firm, and factual. The letter began, "Dear Madam President." I intentionally avoided using her name. In the first paragraph, I acknowledged receipt of her letter, referencing its date. In the second paragraph, I stated, clearly and without emotion, that my property, identified by its county parcel number, was not and had never been a part of the Pleasant Meadows HOA. In the third paragraph, I respectfully informed her that the covenants and bylaws of her association were therefore not applicable to my property, and that her demand for me to cease construction and submit to her committee's review was without any legal basis. For the fourth paragraph, I went a step further. I included a photocopy of the relevant page from my property survey, with the boundaries clearly marked. I also included a photocopy of the first page of the HOA's own charter, which listed every single parcel of land subject to its authority. My parcel number was, of course, conspicuously absent. I circled the list of included parcels in red ink. I concluded the letter by stating, "Accordingly, I must decline your request. The legally permitted construction will proceed as scheduled. I trust this clarifies the matter." I signed it, put it in a crisp white envelope, and took a drive to the post office. I sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested. This was a critical step. It created a legal record that she had received and signed for my letter. There would be no "I never got it" excuses. The little green card would come back to me with her signature on it, and it would go straight into the binder. The cost was $7.50. It was the best money I'd ever spent. The little green card came back 4 days later, bearing a spiky, indignant-looking signature. I slid it into a plastic sleeve right behind the copy of my letter. The binder was getting heavier. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The pieces were being set. For about a week, there was silence. The construction crew framed the walls of my workshop. It was starting to look like something real. I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, my clear, fact-based letter had gotten through to her. Maybe she had consulted a lawyer who told her to stand down. I should have known better. Petty tyrants don't yield to facts. Facts are an inconvenient nuisance to be ignored. Their power is built on the belief that if they just insist loudly and aggressively enough, reality itself will bend to their will. The second letter arrived the following Tuesday. Same cream-colored envelope, same gold-embossed letterhead. But the tone had changed. The pretense of polite bureaucracy was gone, replaced by undisguised hostility. Despite our formal notification, it began, our office has observed that unauthorized construction continues unabated. It went on to state that my failure to comply had resulted in a fine of $500 and that an additional fine of $100 per day would be levied until construction ceased, and I submitted to the authority of the committee. The total due was now $1,100. It was absurd. It was like getting a speeding ticket from the chess club, a meaningless piece of paper from an entity with zero jurisdiction. But it was also a clear escalation. She was ignoring my evidence. She was doubling down. I three-hole punched the new letter and the accompanying invoice and added them to the binder. Then I sat down and composed my second reply. This one was shorter. Dear Madam President, it read, I refer you to my previous letter dated date, for which I have a signed receipt of delivery. As established in that correspondence, your association has no legal authority over my property. Your attempts to levy fines are therefore legally void and constitute a form of harassment. Please cease all further correspondence on this matter. Any further attempts to intimidate or interfere with my lawful activities will be documented and forwarded to my legal counsel. Again, I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. Again, the little green card came back a few days later, the signature looking even angrier this time. I filed it neatly in the binder. The correspondence section was now looking quite robust. It was at this point that I realized correspondence alone wouldn't win this. She was irrational. She was operating in a fantasy world where her power was absolute. I needed to move to the next phase of the operation, reconnaissance and the gathering of external intelligence. I needed to understand the laws she was actually breaking, and I needed to see if I had any potential allies behind enemy lines. So I traded my hammer for a keyboard. I poured myself a large mug of black coffee and dove into the labyrinth of state and county law. I spent 2 solid days reading. I read property law. I read statutes governing the powers and limitations of homeowners associations. I read legal precedents from court cases involving HOA overreach. I took copious notes, printing out relevant statutes and highlighting key phrases. This all went into a new section of the binder labeled Legal Research. And then I found it, the smoking gun. It wasn't buried in some obscure property law textbook. It was right there in the state's administrative code governing construction and building inspections. A simple 1-paragraph statute. It stated, in unambiguous language, that official building permits must be displayed in a conspicuous and protected manner on the construction site at all times, and that any unauthorized removal, defacement, or obscuring of said permits was a Class 3 misdemeanor, punishable by a fine of up to $500 and / or 30 days in jail. I printed it out and stared at it. This changed everything. Her act of taking the permits off my site board wasn't just a petty power play. It wasn't a civil dispute. It was a criminal offense. She had broken an actual law, not just her own imaginary ones. I put the printout in the very front of the binder in its own special sleeve. This was now the cornerstone of my counteroffensive. The next escalation came not in the mail, but in person. It was the day she stole the permits, the day this whole thing kicked into high gear. After she marched off with my papers, I didn't yell. I didn't follow her. I waited 15 minutes, then I calmly got in my truck and drove to the county sheriff's office. I walked up to the front desk, where a weary-looking deputy was typing slowly on a keyboard. I'd like to file a report, I said. He sighed, a sound of pure bureaucratic exhaustion. What kind of report? A theft, I said, and a violation of a state administrative code. He looked at me with mild interest. I explained the situation calmly and factually. A woman, my neighbor, had come onto my property and stolen my building permits from the construction site. The deputy's interest faded. Sir, this sounds like a civil matter, a dispute between neighbors. We don't really get involved in that. I had anticipated this. Ordinarily, I would agree, I said, my voice steady. However, in this case, it's also a violation of State Statute 14-288.5b. I recited the number from memory. Unauthorized removal of a posted building permit. It's a Class 3 misdemeanor. The deputy stopped typing. He looked up at me, his expression shifting from boredom to professional curiosity. He squinted. You got the statute number? I do, I said. I can show you the text if you'd like. I have it with me. I patted the slim briefcase I had brought, which contained a few key pages from the binder. He held up a hand. No, that's okay. He turned to his computer and his fingers, which had been so sluggish before, now flew across the keyboard. After a moment, he grunted. Well, you're right. He grabbed a form and a pen. Okay, sir, let's take your statement. I spent the next 30 minutes giving a precise, detailed account of the event. I gave him Brenda's name and address. I provided the names of the contractor and the county inspector as potential witnesses to the permit's original placement. I did not embellish. I did not speculate on her motives. I just gave him the facts. He gave me a case number. I wrote it down on a fresh sheet of paper, and when I got home, it went right into the binder. The next morning, I called my contractor, Earl. I explained what had happened. He let out a long, low whistle. Lived here my whole life, he said, his voice a gravelly drawl. Built hundreds of houses. Never had somebody walk off with the permits. That's a new one. I drove to the county office and paid for a new set of permits. More expense, more time. I added the receipt to the binder. When I got back to the site, Earl was there. Got an idea, he said, a twinkle in his eye. He held up a small black object. It was a trail camera, the kind hunters use to spot deer. Motion activated, high-definition video, night vision. Let's see her try it again. We mounted it on a tree, perfectly concealed by leaves, with a clear, unobstructed view of the permit box. I felt a surge of something cold and exhilarating. The trap was set. While I waited for Brenda to make her next move, I initiated the next phase of the operation. Alliance building. I knew I couldn't be the only person suffocating under her reign. A tyrant needs subjects to tyrannize. I decided to take a walk. I put on a friendly face and strolled down the public walking path that snaked through Pleasant Meadows. It didn't take long. I saw an elderly man meticulously tending his rose bushes. His house was immaculate, his lawn like a green carpet. But in the center of his lawn was a small brown patch, a perfect circle of dead grass. Beautiful roses, I said, stopping at his walkway. He looked up, startled. He was a small, gentle-looking man with kind eyes. Oh, thank you, he said. They're my pride and joy. We chatted for a few minutes about gardening, then I gestured to the brown patch. Weed problem? His face fell. No, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That was my bird feeder. President Brenda said it was attracting undesirable birds. Pigeons, she claimed, though I only ever saw finches and cardinals. She said it violated a bylaw about nuisance-attracting structures. Fined me $200 and made me take it down. He shook his head sadly. I miss watching them in the morning. This was Mr. Henderson. I listened to his story, my blood pressure rising steadily. I told him a little about my own situation, about the workshop and the letters. He listened, his eyes wide. I gave him my phone number. If you ever feel like things need to change around here, I said, give me a call. 2 houses down, I saw a family in their driveway. A young couple, maybe in their late 30s, were trying to reason with their 2 young sons, who were looking forlornly at the garage. What's the matter, boys? I asked cheerfully. Too hot for basketball? The father turned to me, his face a mask of weary frustration. Not too hot, he said. Not allowed. We just got our third violation notice for the basketball hoop. Apparently, it detracts from the neighborhood's aesthetic uniformity. We have to take it down or face a $500 fine. This was the Miller family. They had moved in 6 months ago, dreaming of a safe, friendly neighborhood for their kids. Instead, they had found a suburban dictatorship. I listened to their story of constant, petty harassment, a notice about their trash cans being visible from the street for 2 hours too long, a warning about their son's bicycle being left on the lawn, and now the war on the basketball hoop. I gave them my number too. A few of us are getting tired of this, I said quietly. Change might be coming. The mother looked at me, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Really? We were thinking of selling. We can't live like this. Don't sell just yet, I said. Give it a month. My walk confirmed my hypothesis. Brenda's tyranny wasn't focused solely on me. It was a wide-spectrum assault on joy, individuality, and common sense. She was running a miserable little kingdom, and her subjects were terrified. But they were also simmering. All they needed was a catalyst, a leader. I got the call from Earl 2 days later. Check your email, was all he said. I logged on. The file was a short video clip. The timestamp was 2:17 a.m. The video was crisp, black and white infrared. It showed the site board, the permit box clearly visible. A figure walks into the frame, a woman in a bathrobe and slippers. Her face is as clear as day. It's Brenda. She glances around furtively, a parody of a spy in a cheap movie. Then she walks directly to the box, fumbles with the latch, pulls out the new set of permits, and stuffs them into the pocket of her bathrobe. She closes the empty box, gives one last paranoid look around, and scurries back off into the darkness. I watched it 3 times. The sheer, idiotic arrogance of it was breathtaking. She had done it again, and this time, I had her. Cold, hard, undeniable proof. High-definition video of her committing a crime. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of an engineer who has just found the precise, critical stress fracture in the enemy's defenses. The operation was about to enter its final phase, the counter-offensive. The first thing I did the next morning was not to call the sheriff. That would come later. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I didn't just pick one out of the phone book. I made a call to an old friend from the service, a retired general, and asked for a recommendation. He gave me a name. Frank Peterson, he said. Retired JAG colonel. Mean as a snake and twice as smart. He eats HOAs for breakfast. Tell him I sent you. I got an appointment with Frank that same afternoon. His office was lean and efficient, not a wasted inch of space. Frank himself was a man in his late 60s, with a ramrod-straight posture and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a man who could still field-strip a rifle in under a minute. General Thompson says you have a problem, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Lay it on me. I didn't give him a long, emotional story. I simply placed the binder on his desk. Operation Overstep, I said. It's all in there, chronological order. He raised an eyebrow at the name, then opened the binder. For the next 20 minutes, he said nothing. He just turned the pages, his expression unreadable. He read her letters. He read my certified mail receipts. He read my legal research, pausing at the printout of the misdemeanor statute. He examined the police report number. He read my notes on Mr. Henderson and the Miller family. Finally, I handed him a USB stick. And this, I said, is from 2 nights ago. He plugged it into his laptop and watched the video of Brenda in her bathrobe. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him smile. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a newfound respect. Colonel, he said, this isn't a binder. This is a prosecutor's dream. It's a kill box. You've done 90% of my job for me." He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This woman has not only engaged in a pattern of escalating harassment against a non-member of her association, which is legally actionable, but she has done so using HOA resources, their letterhead, their funds for postage. And now you have her on video, dead to rights, committing a criminal act. Twice." "So what's the plan?" I asked. "The plan," he said, his eyes gleaming, "is total annihilation. We're not just going to stop her, we're going to remove her. We're going to salt the earth so that no petty tyrant like her can ever take root in that neighborhood again." His energy was infectious. For the first time, I felt the thrill of a true partnership in this fight. "First," he said, tapping the binder, "we go back to the sheriff, not the front desk. We're going to the lead detective for property crimes, you and me. We're going to present this evidence and formally request that charges be filed. The video makes it a slam dunk. Second, I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter that will make her hair curl. It will outline every single one of her illegal actions and inform her that we are pursuing both criminal charges and a civil suit for harassment. Third, and this is the fun part," he continued, "we turn her own organization against her. When is their annual members meeting?" "In 3 weeks," I said. "Perfect," he grinned. "That's our D-Day. We are going to orchestrate a public coup." Just as we were wrapping up, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Is this Colonel Miller?" a man's voice asked. It was nervous, hesitant. "It is. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is David," the man said. "David Chen. I used to be the treasurer for the Pleasant Meadows HOA. I heard from my friend, Bill Henderson, that you were standing up to Brenda." My pulse quickened. This was the inside source, the missing piece. "I'm listening, David." "She forced me out," he said, his voice a mixture of anger and shame. "I questioned some of her expenses. She was using the HOA's debit card for things that weren't right, paying her personal lawyer to send threatening letters, board meetings at 5-star restaurants for just her and her 2 cronies on the board. When I tried to bring it up, she accused me of incompetence and organized a vote to have me removed." "David," I said, my voice low and serious, "do you have any proof of this? Bank statements? Receipts?" There was a pause. "I made copies," he whispered, "before I turned everything over. I knew it was wrong. I didn't know what to do." Frank was looking at me, his eyes wide with predatory glee. He was practically vibrating. "David," I said calmly, "I think you do know what to do. Can you meet with me and my lawyer tomorrow?" The next day, David handed us a folder. It was thin, but it was pure gold. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals, credit card statements with charges for a high-priced law firm, not the HOA's official counsel, and exorbitant restaurant bills. It was evidence of embezzlement and misuse of funds, plain and simple. Frank looked through the documents, his grin growing wider with each page. He looked up at me. "It's over," he said. "This is the kill shot." The next 2 weeks were a blur of coordinated activity. Frank and I met with the sheriff's lead detective. We showed him the video and David's financial documents. The detective's professional indifference transformed into keen interest. An official investigation was launched, not just into the permit theft, but into financial crimes as well. Frank's cease and desist letter was a work of art. It was delivered to Brenda via a process server, a big, burly man who handed it to her right on her doorstep. My allies later told me she slammed the door so hard, one of her little decorative lawn gnomes fell over. Then, we prepared for the HOA meeting. I shared a sanitized version of the plan with my small band of rebels, Mr. Henderson and the Miller family. I showed them the video of Brenda stealing the permits. Their fear finally, blessedly, turned into cold, hard anger. They were ready to fight. David agreed to present his financial findings. Frank would be there as my legal representative. We had our team. We had our evidence. We had our plan. The night of the annual meeting arrived. The community clubhouse was packed. More people than had ever shown up before. Word had clearly gotten out that something big was going to happen. The air was thick with tension. Brenda sat at the head table with her two crony board members, a simpering woman named Carol, and a man who looked like a startled turtle named Gary. Brenda was wearing a power suit the color of blood. She banged the gavel, a look of supreme confidence on her face. She had no idea she was about to preside over her own execution. They droned through the old business, the minutes, the treasurer's report, a sanitized, fictional version delivered by Carol. Then Brenda said the fateful words, "Is there any new business?" I stood up. A hush fell over the room. "Brenda," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. I used her first name deliberately. No more Madam President. "Colonel Miller, you are not a member of this association. You have no standing to speak," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "I'm not speaking as a member," I replied calmly. "I'm speaking as a victim of a crime perpetrated by the president of this board, using this association's resources." A gasp went through the crowd. "That is an outrageous and slanderous accusation," she shrieked, banging her gavel. "You are out of order." "Am I?" I asked. I turned to the audience. "For the last month, your president has been conducting a campaign of harassment against me, trying to illegally assert authority over my private property. She has sent threatening letters on HOA letterhead. But she didn't stop there." I held up a copy of the police report. "This is a report I filed when she came onto my property and stole my legally issued building permits, a criminal act." The room erupted in murmurs. "Lies!" Brenda screamed, her face turning a blotchy red. "He has no proof." "That's where you're wrong," I said, "because after she did it a second time, in the dead of night, I had this." Frank, on cue, plugged the USB stick into a projector we had set up. And there, on a giant screen for the entire neighborhood to see, was Brenda, in her bathrobe and slippers, stealing the permits. The room was dead silent for a moment, and then a wave of shock and disgust washed over the faces of the homeowners. Brenda stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She was utterly, completely exposed. But we were just getting started. "And my case is not unique," I said, my voice ringing with authority. I pointed to the back of the room. "Mr. Henderson, would you care to tell the community about your bird feeder?" The gentle old man stood up, his voice shaking but firm. He told the story of the fines, of the undesirable birds, of the simple joy that had been stolen from him. When he finished, a woman in the front shouted, "She did the same to me over my wind chimes." Then Mr. Miller stood up. "And what about our basketball hoop? Is a child's toy really a threat to your aesthetic harmony, Brenda?" he demanded. A chorus of voices erupted. Stories of fines for holiday decorations, for flower pots, for cars parked in their own driveways for a few hours too long. It was a tidal wave of suppressed resentment finally breaking free. Brenda was frantically banging her gavel, screeching, "Order! Order!" But no one was listening. Her power had evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. Her cronies, Carol and Gary, looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Then David Chen stood up, holding a stack of papers. "And while she was fining all of you for bird feeders and basketball hoops," he announced, his voice clear and strong, "this is what she was doing with your money." The financial statements went up on the projector. The charges for her personal lawyer. The $500 dinners for 3 people. The unexplained cash withdrawals. It was all there, in black and white. Betrayal was now added to the list of her sins. The room exploded, not in murmurs this time, but in open, furious shouting. "Thief!" someone yelled. "Resign!" screamed another. Brenda stood up, her face a grotesque mask of fury and panic. "This is an illegal meeting, a conspiracy. "I will sue every single one of you," she shrieked, her voice cracking. That's when Frank stood up, his military bearing silencing the room instantly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice like ice, "the only person getting sued here tonight is you. The new board of this HOA will be suing you to recover the funds you embezzled. And I'd save your money for a criminal defense attorney because a detective from the sheriff's office will be paying you a visit very soon. You have committed fraud, embezzlement, and theft. You are a disgrace." A brave homeowner, a woman I'd never met, jumped to her feet. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence and the removal of the entire board of directors." "Seconded," roared half the room. Brenda stared out at the sea of angry faces, her face crumbling. The gavel fell from her hand and clattered onto the table. Her authority, her identity, her entire petty kingdom, all of it was gone. She gave a little sob, a pathetic, whimpering sound, then turned and fled. She practically ran out of the room, pushing past the stunned homeowners in the doorway. The room erupted in applause. It was a wild, cathartic, joyful sound, the sound of liberation. In the aftermath, a new interim board was elected on the spot. Mr. Henderson, to his shock and blushing delight, was nominated and unanimously voted in as the new president. Their first official act was to pass a motion voiding every fine Brenda had issued in the past year. Their second was to issue a formal, public apology to me, the Miller family, and everyone else she had terrorized. Their third, on Frank's advice, was to authorize legal action against Brenda to recover the association's money. The reckoning for Brenda was swift and brutal. The sheriff's investigation, bolstered by the testimony from half the neighborhood, resulted in multiple criminal charges. Faced with irrefutable evidence, she pleaded guilty to misdemeanor theft and felony embezzlement. She was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. The civil suits followed. The HOA sued her and won, placing a lien on her house for the funds she'd stolen. Between the legal fees and the restitution, she was financially ruined. A "for sale" sign went up on her lawn a month later. The house, I heard, sold quickly. I never saw her again. The change in Pleasant Meadows was immediate and profound. The atmosphere of fear evaporated, replaced by a genuine sense of community. People started talking to each other. Mr. Henderson's first act as president was to personally buy and install a new bird feeder on his lawn. The Millers' basketball hoop went back up. A neighborhood-wide barbecue was held a few weeks later. I was invited as the guest of honor. It was the first time I had ever willingly set foot inside the subdivision. It was actually quite pleasant. And me? My workshop was completed without further incident. The walls are lined with tools. The air smells of cedar and sawdust. The big windows look out not on a sea of beige houses, but deep into my own quiet woods. Sometimes when I'm standing at the lathe, turning a rough block of maple into something smooth and beautiful, I think about the battle for this piece. It's quiet here now. The only sounds are the chirp of birds from the creek and the hum of my machinery. It's the sound of a hard-won victory. It's the sound of my sanctuary successfully defended. I learned something from all this. Tyranny, no matter how small its kingdom, thrives on the silence of the oppressed. It feeds on apathy and the belief that it's easier to just pay the fine or take down the bird feeder than it is to fight. But sometimes, all it takes is one person who is willing to say no, to build a case, to draw a line in the sand and defend it with facts and cold, hard documentation. Peace isn't a passive state. Sometimes it's a mission objective. You have to be willing to plan, to fight, and to win it. And then, and only then, can you truly enjoy the quiet.